Steve, put your hat back on so we can see your hat. We want to get the full regalia.
I'll make sure what school he went to, huh?
Right. Want to see what
You got your Duke hat?
That's an NC. We'll have to focus in on the NC there and make sure we get in on the
I want his color for the basketball.
get the full effect of the NC there. All right.
Your daughters.
We got Mr. Rip Bernhard here today. All righty. We've got Horace here. We're going to focus in on everybody. Give them all a cameo appearance. We've got Fred here. How are we doing?
Hi, thanks.
I didn't know you were telling us, Fred.
We got everybody in here now. Okay, you guys ready to start? We'll start them out.
Let's roll.
Anytime.
Let's roll.
We're going.
You want me to lead it off?
Sure.
Well, it's another pleasure to be here again and bring to the situation, the scene, another one of Greensboro's most outstanding lawyers. Man who's devoted a large portion of his life to dedicated to the law and the practice thereof.
52 years.
And it's good to have you here today, Steve.
Thank you.
And we're going to bear down on you because you have a record that's worthy of recognition and of penetrating interrogation. And that's what you're going to be subjected to today. Unfortunately, I had thought that I would be the one to have that honor and pleasure. But in the meantime, in studying the situation, I've come down with a throat problem, and I can't get to my usual irascible self.
I've never done anything to stop you from talking to her.
Well,
This could be the only thing.
To stop, but you cut down on my decibels. You've cut down on my decibels a lot. But anyway, on the serious side of this, it is a pleasure to have this honor, have this opportunity to talk to you. And this is really significant because, as you know, and all of us in this room know, the Greensboro Bar is perhaps the leading bar in the state of North Carolina. Now, there are a few around Charlotte and maybe 2 or 3 in Raleigh that would challenge me on that, but I think that if we were left to our own devices, we could come up with the same sort of impression that judges, I'm talking about the old-time judges came up with, like Oil Sink and
Judge Armstrong.
Judge Armstrong. Yeah, he was another one, and he would agree with this, I think. The gentleman from down in the southern part of the state, you know who I'm talking about. He was quite a judge from down at Rockingham.
F. Donald Phillips.
F. Donald Phillips, and he was one of the. You either loved him or you didn't like him at all.
He would threaten to put you in jail.
He'd put you in jail and leave you there for a while. But he never put me in jail.
He didn't me either, but he threatened to a couple of times.
Well, he did. Well, he missed an opportunity then, didn't he? Anyway, Steve, you are obviously a native of Virginia. We know that. But you came to North Carolina at an early age.
2 weeks old.
You were 2 weeks old. So you did all right. You straightened the record up pretty quick. And then how old were you when you decided you wanted to practice law?
I think I decided it when I used to watch the trials at the courthouse in Halifax.
Halifax County?
They had about 3 sessions, no more than 4 sessions a year.
Well, they didn't have, but they had, in those days, they had 2 one-week sessions every 6 months. So that would add up to 4 weekly sessions.
And the people would come from all over the county to watch the lawyers because there were several there who were very flamboyant. Judy Alsbrook was one. His son Richard, you know, later became judge.
He's still there.
Judy Alsbrook and George Green from Weldon and Ed Travis from Halifax. And there were 1 or 2 others, but I would put those lawyers up against any trial lawyers anywhere I've ever seen. They put on a show. I figured if they had that much fun practicing law, I would try.
You're going to try it yourself.
And it drew a crowd. I'd like that idea too.
Well, now, you still haven't told us how old you were when you
Well, my
jumped
mother
into
lived
this,
in
made this momentous decision.
Well, let me tell you about that. My mother and father lived in Halifax, but that was a town, population of 321. That was in 1926. And I checked the census recently, and the town has grown from 321 to 352 in 78 years. But in any event, it was the county seat and had the courthouse and jail there. But my mother was having trouble. She lost her first child. She had trouble with me. So the local doctor, who was Dr. Susan Welland, she didn't have a doctor in Halifax, like they didn't have a high school in Halifax. Dr. Susan Welland sent my mother to Richmond, Virginia, to Dr. Rucker, who was a well-known obstetrician. But he's credited with saving my mother's life and saving my life too, because I was premature and weighed only 3 pounds 6 ounces. And really wasn't supposed to live. Wouldn't have lived if this doctor hadn't been so good. But the story is that my mother and father came from Richmond to Halifax on a train taking me home. And my mother carried me in a size 9 shoebox. It was room to spare. So I'm lucky to.
Well, we're fortunate.
This whole 78 years is a bonus.
Yeah. Well, you got your education in Halifax County?
The first 7 years.
First 7 years.
Actually, my education started sooner than 77. I
Uh,
started learning things when I was about 3 weeks old.
3, you started picking up stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, information, and restored it, and that.
Yeah, because my grandfather owned a big farm, and I would go out there when I was about 2 or 3 years old and watch them pick tobacco and cure it in the barns and shell the peanut, dig up the peanut vine.
You raised a lot of peanuts too in those days,
and
didn't
cotton and corn. And he had a big orchard and watermelon patch and had a sawmill and a blacksmith shop. He not only was the farmer, he was a blacksmith, and a sawmill operator, and he was the magistrate of Justice Peak.
he? He was a very, very productive man.
He did a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, it was that way in those days.
Yeah, that's true. That was
Yeah.
not untypical.
Yeah, at the risk of bragging a little bit, I came from the same kind of situation. My grandfather he was studying veterinary medicine, and he caught the bad thing that came along in the late 1800s.
Flu.
No, that's flu, worse than flu. This was
The flu came in 1918.
epidemic. This was the
The
epidemic.
flu came in 1918.
Yeah, that was 1918, see. My daddy was in the flu. He was in World War II. My grandfather was practicing veterinary medicine then. Well, anyway, and that's another story.
We're talking about education. Not only did I learn from my grandfather, but I had 11 uncles and aunts. And I was the oldest grandchild, so they all
You learned a lot from
gave me a
them.
lot of attention. So I was well educated before I ever started grammar school.
Well, that was quite a faculty that you would pray to. And anyway, you
There's an advantage being the first grandchild.
yes, it is, it is. And I think you weathered that storm. You came through, and you did well.
I always got the first slice of pie and the first slice of cake from my grandmother.
Well, that's the way it is in the country down here in this area, Fred. Now, what convinced you, other than going to the courthouse and hearing the arguments made by the outstanding lawyers and members of the bar in Halifax County, does anything else that preyed on you to the point of causing you to go into the law business? I'll put it that way.
Well, the lawyers back at that time were thought we a lot, and I think they still are in a way, but back then they were thought even more probably relatives.
And they thought more of them in Halifax County than they did
yeah.
some other counties.
They all prospered, and I thought practicing law was better than pumping gas at the gas station. That was about the only other thing.
That was the alternative
Yeah.
to practicing law.
Yeah. Well, I didn't make an absolute decision. I had a lot of time to think about it when I was in the Navy. I'd stand and watch all night long and think about what it would be like.
Yeah. Well, you've already broached in the second question I was going to ask you about. In addition to your very significant career as a lawyer. You also had a very distinguished career in serving our country in time of peril, World War II, when you went in and volunteered for the Navy.
At age 17.
At age, lied about your age to get in. You weren't?
No, my mother signed for me.
17. How'd you get her to sign?
Well, she told me instead of going into service that May when I finished high school, if I'd wait till Christmas, she would sign for me. So I waited till Christmas after Christmas.
And she signed for you.
Yeah.
All right. And did they send you to sea right off, or
Well, I
when
was.
when were you able to?
Well, I went to
Yeah.
I went to NC State in the summer and fall, waiting till the Christmas got here.
Yeah, you didn't have
And
to
I
tell
ran, I
that.
ran into several guys there who became good friends. One of them was Joe Barrow from Lewisburg, and one was Bill Lee from Greenville. Well, those two fellows had appointments to Annapolis. They were studying like mad to go to the academy, and I was moved through the room together. But when they left to go to the academy, I went out to the recruiting office. Well, first I tried to get in the Marines. My eyesight was a little bit off, so the Marine sergeant wouldn't let me in. And right across the hall from the Marines was a Navy recruiting office. But the recruiter was my first cousin, Shelton Branch from Rich Square. And Shelton said, "You don't want to go to the Marines, you just go out and get killed." I said, "Well, that's all right." He said, "No."
That's an honor.
Well, when they turned me down, Shelton said, "Come on, I'll sign you up for the Navy." I said, "Shelton, I'll sign up with the Navy if you guarantee me a duty that I want." He said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want to be an air gunner." He said, "Okay, we'll send you to air gunner school and you'll be out and have a good time." And that rascal, even though he was my first cousin, had to know that he couldn't guarantee that. But he convinced me that he could. I got down to Jacksonville, Florida, and told them they said, well, after boot training, they said, "Well, what do you want to do now?" I said, "Well, I was promised an air gunner school."
They laughed at
They
you.
said, "We don't need any air gunners right now, we need people in other areas." I said, "But I was promised air gunners." They said, "Well, who told you that?" I said, "It's the recruiter in Raleigh." They said, "We don't know the recruiter in Raleigh." I said, "You got to know Sheldon Branch, she's my cousin." I don't know Sheldon Branch, so I had to settle for something else.
Yeah.
I said, "Well, just send me on out, let's get going." So I went to Torpedoman School, and then went on out to the fleet.
Yeah.
Out San Francisco, New Guinea, and Australia, and in the Philippines, Okinawa, and Korea, and China, back home. I didn't have an audit distinguished career, but I covered a lot of miles, traveled a lot, saw a lot, had a good time.
How long were you overseas the first time you went?
Well, I didn't go overseas one time. That was,
Oh, you didn't go but one time.
that's right. I was actually overseas for probably about a year, a little more than a year. About a year and 3 months, about 15 months.
That's about par for the course in WW2.
Yeah, but you know, we were supposed to invade Japan. Everybody was looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it in a, not, I guess you might say, not in a anticipating fun, but anticipating adventure.
Yeah.
And of course, the build of it started, and it was an abrupt end to the war when the time of the bomb was dropped. So everybody was glad that it ended, but it did end differently from what
But you
a lot of people
thought
thought.
a year before, or
Yeah, but
6 months
I was in Okinawa when they dropped the bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us thought, you know, we were in for another exciting adventure invading Japan and that kind of thing. But I'm not saying.
Well, you weren't looking forward to invading Japan.
Well, like I say, there are two sides to that question about it. Whether you want to, you're looking forward to the excitement, anticipating the excitement of it, and realizing how important it was. But you certainly don't want to get into the kill. I mean, you're not looking at it as fun, you're looking at it as an adventure. Because I was only 18 or 19 then, so when you're that age, you are looking for two things, and excitement is one of them.
And you're not going to leave the other one off.
Well, I'll just leave that to your imagination.
You're in my imagination. I think this crowd can pretty well imagine what you had in mind.
I don't know. You think the imagination goes that far?
Yeah, I think so. I can look at the smiles on their faces. You can tell. You
I
can
see a
tell.
smile on your face too, so you
Well,
remember, you got a long memory.
I've got a long memory for friends. I like to see my friends enjoying life.
It's been a good life
But
so
you've
far.
done it, yeah, it has been. Well, then, after you went to Chapel Hill, to undergraduate and law school, as I
That
understand it.
is correct.
You didn't choose the route that some of our people use to split up your education,
No,
to use some of it here and some of it there.
no. Back then, Duke was a dirty word, so I did not consider going to Duke. It had already been to state, so I had to have Wake Forest and Chapel Hill. So I chose to go to Chapel Hill, but I finished undergraduate in 3 years by going 2 summers.
Yeah,
But that was the time, coming back in 46, was when all the servicemen were coming back, and everybody was doubling up and making up time and so forth. So
that's true.
I came back in 46 and finished in 49. And went to law school from 49 to 52.
That's
A
true.
little bit earlier than Rip. Mr. Bernhardt came along 5 years later.
Mhm.
What was your undergraduate degree in?
Business.
Business.
So I think they call it commerce in Bachelor of Science in Commerce.
Yeah.
Business school, economics, finance, business, banking, all that. Had a good time at Chapel Hill.
Well, I understand most people did. That's the reason you went there, wasn't it?
That's part
Have a
of it.
good time?
That's part of it.
Uh,
First night there, I rode a mule into the dormitory. That established my
You
reputation.
rode him into the dormitory or by the
Child
dormitory?
Justice and I were in the same class. We started the same day. And the day after I rode that mule to the dormitory, I was better known to Child Justice.
I bet you
But
were.
that fame didn't last long. He edged me out in the long run, but at least for an hour or two.
Did you get into the Daily Tar Heel?
I don't know. I never could figure out where the mule came from, real, but it was a party I ran
Orange
to that.
County, I'll tell you where it
Ran
is.
into-
Cedar Grove.
I ran into a party of the guys that night. I was apparently I had done so long before. Of course, along about 3 o'clock, I rode the mule back across the campus, and he'd been such a good mule. He'd give me a ride. I took him in the dorm and took him in the room, my room. And my roommate, I hadn't met before. He was a 17-year-old boy from South Carolina. He'd been dead asleep since 9 o'clock, I'm sure. And I took the mule into
Into the room, dormitory room.
flipped the light on, slammed the door, and that boy woke up and scared the hell out of him. He was clawing the walls trying to get out. If you can imagine waking up in the middle of the night with a mule,
I can't believe that.
it was so much fun. I took him out of there and went into the
Did you
next room and went to
visit some other rooms?
several rooms, and when that kind of played out, everybody in the dorm was up and about, having fun and laughing, carrying on, about 3:30, 4 o'clock. And first night I'd been in Chapel Hill, and some fella who was a little bit grumpy came down from the 3rd floor. And he was the only one out of the whole crowd that didn't like
He
it. Didn't
objected?
like it. He objected, and he said, "You damn fool, what are you doing waking everybody up at this time of night?" He said, "I'm gonna have you thrown out of here. Where's the door manager?" He went to the door manager's room and had the manager up on the door, and everybody laughed. He said, "Where's the door? Where's the door?" Finally, somebody told him the door manager's the guy on the mule. I was riding up down the hall. So to cap it off, he was looking for the door manager, but I was the door manager.
You were the door manager. Dorm manager, yeah.
That was a good start. I told that story because it's a good way to start your college education. It can be.
That must have been one of the dorms that had a low threshold.
Well, the steps were sort of steep. It took a lot of urge to get the mule up the steps. He didn't like it at all.
Did you finally walk him up the steps?
I finally got him up the steps. He
Yeah.
clomp, 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 clomp. And when it was all over, after a couple of hours, I took him across the quadrangle, and there was a friend of mine who'd been in the Marines, Billy Brickle, from Brickle's Crossroads. That's near Buzzardtown in Halifax County. Well, Buzzardtown is one crossroads, and Brickle's Crossroads is next. Billy Brickle was in another dorm. He'd been in the Marines. And I went over and tied the mule to his doorknob and knocked like crazy and then wraps. I guess he let the mule in, I don't know. I didn't wait to see. I was getting sleepy by that time.
He didn't leave the mule out all night, did he?
And I wanted to get him in the shelter, so
Yeah, that's right.
have a place to stay.
Steve, I knew you'd done a lot of great things, but being a mule master, mule skinner, wasn't one of them that
I grew up in Halifax. I knew about mules. It was my grandfather had mules.
Yeah, I know
This is
that.
before anybody had tractors.
Yeah, you're right about that.
A lot of people think a dog is your best friend, but back in those days, a
Mule was your best friend, yeah. Well, just go ahead and tell us now about how you did in law school, and what courses you took, and what inspired you to go on and on and on and stick with it until you finally captured the law and went out, and tell us how you got started in the law practice.
Well, I tell you, one thing to contribute to education, I went to classes most of the time at Chapel Hill. But having been in the Navy and being older, I didn't feel like they took it all out. But I went to most of them. But part of my education at Chapel Hill was being a member of the Zeta Xi fraternity.
Zeta Xi.
And you got to know some of them to appreciate the education that I picked up at the Zeta.
Mm-hmm.
Bynum Hunter was a good illustration. He was a Zeta.
He was a Zeta Xi?
Yeah, so Bynum and I became acquainted.
I know Bynum.
When we both were fraternity members.
You both took the spirits of the association, of the organization, didn't you?
Well, we did things to create more friendship among us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And there were others that were similar character as Bynum. I just use him as an illustration because you know him.
I know him.
And the others
He
were of
knows
similar
him.
character.
He knows him, and he knows him. We all know Bynum.
But most of the guys then had been in the military service, so we always had something in common. And a number of friends of mine in undergraduate law school both had them shot off. There was one guy who had both legs shot off. And another fellow had one leg missing. That was Bill.
Who was that?
Bill from Concord.
Bill Mills.
Bill Mills. Bill Mills left one leg in Europe. And then another guy who was flying B-17 had a shell explode in his face. His face was one massive scar. He was blind. I used to read for him. So
He didn't go to law school, did
he
he?
went to law school.
He did? Did he
Went
get
on-
through?
Yeah, he got through. And he practiced law for a while. And then he was a city court judge for a while. But he got to drinking too much. And I know it was because of the experience he'd had. Because being blind is puts you to disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
But his war experience and his experience trying to make it as a blind man finally got to him and committed suicide.
Mm. It's too bad.
Another character was Dick Manning, who was from Raleigh. He was a Zeta also, but he had joined the Army when he was 15. His father was a federal attorney in the Eastern District and in Raleigh, and he was also head of the National Guard, general head of the National Guard, General Manning. And when the war started, they federalized his division and put it on active duty. And when they did that, Dick went down to the sergeant in his father's division and tried to join the Army. And the sergeant knew Dick, of course, because he knew his father. And he says, Dick, you're not old enough to join the Army. He said, hell, I'm not, I'm 18. And they argued with him, and the sergeant said, I said, well, let me call you for Dick. So he called the general. Said, General Manning, your son Dick is out here trying to join the Army. I don't think he's old enough. Well, General Manning said, well, Sergeant, how old does he say he is? The sergeant said, well, General, he says he's 18. General Manning said, well, God damn it, if he says he's 18, he is 18. So he said, they let him in, and Dick said he spent the whole first year on Kitchener Police, on KP, in his father's division. Every 2 weeks he put in a request for transfer, but his father wouldn't let him out. He kept on KP for a year.
No kidding.
Finally transferred to the Airborne
Mm-hmm.
and was commissioned a lieutenant when he was 17. And the rule then was you couldn't accept a commission to 18. So he had to sit tight with as a second lieutenant before they would let him put on his bars. But he was shot all up in the Battle of the Bulge. He was in the,
Yeah, that was a rough one, the Battle of the Bulge.
and he came back. Came back to Chapel Hill, and he was shot up so bad they kept him in the hospital at Butner because, you know, they wouldn't discharge a person when they reached a certain degree of recovery. So he lived at the hospital at Camp Butner and commuted to Chapel Hill for classes. Well, the rest of us were joined on the GI Bill. I think it was $75 a month then. Later it was increased. But Dick drew a big pay because he was a captain on active duty. He was a paratrooper captain on active duty, so he drew a big check. And every time you got a check, we'd have the damnedest party you've ever seen. He'd cash that check in money. We'd go to some bar or somebody's house. It was the damnedest party you've ever seen on Dick Manning's captain's pay.
They were the days.
But what was your, I dodged your question. I gave you an answer, but it wasn't an answer.
You gave me a good answer, a long answer. But I don't believe it was the answer to the question I
He
put
said
you.
something about law school.
Yeah, so I did. I was trying to get into the subject of law school.
Yeah, well, I did go to law school.
Well, that's what I wanted to get out
We
of it.
verified that.
I wanted you to
And I
verify.
was so confused the first few weeks, I didn't know what was going on. But I remember the courses and the
Did you take contracts and torts and
Yeah, Dalzell
and
on
all that
contracts,
stuff?
Dalzell on contracts, and Weddick on torts, and Brandis on procedure. And,
Yeah,
Weddick, who
Weddick was on.
Breckenridge,
Bills and notes.
Breckenridge on bills and notes. But
That's
you know,
negotiable instruments.
Yeah, at first I thought it was confusing, and of course then they had no grades during the year, but you had final exams, and that was it. 5 courses, 5 exams. And most of us walked out of those exams not knowing what we did, whether we flunked or passed, didn't what. And I didn't know. I said, well, I could have failed every one of those things.
Yeah, you're
And
right.
I went to the beach and was working for a friend at the beach. And they finally sent the slips out saying what you done. And I almost had a heart attack when I opened that envelope. I was shaking like a leaf.
Yeah.
And I said, this ain't right. I had 5 A's.
You had 5 A's?
Yeah, out of 5 courses. I didn't believe it. I said, this is somebody else. This ain't me.
That's great.
Well, whose was it?
It turned out to be mine, but I didn't
It
believe it.
did?
He was thankful.
Well, it did, yeah. Well, who was your principal? I mean, who gave you all those good grades? Did
Well,
each of the 5 professors
There were 5
grade?
different professors.
5 different concurred.
Yeah.
Well, that was quite an honor you had.
Yeah.
You had the whole faculty in your pocket.
Had them snowball.
You did.
I spoofed them all.
Spoofed them all. I understand now why you.
It goes back to my
Yes,
education
you're-
on granddaddy's farm.
Yeah, ingenious that you were. All right, now who else wants to ask him some questions? I know you do, Rip.
I graduated from law school. I told you I went to law school. I actually graduated.
You got your degree.
Yeah, and McNeil Smith called Dean Brandis at Chapel Hill. And Bynum had been called back to active duty in Korea. I finished at 52, Bynum had finished early. And so when Bynum was called in active duty, they needed somebody, we were 6 hours up there. And 6 or 7. And that was Julius Senior, and young Julius, and Harold Pope, and McNeil, and Bynum, and Braxton Ship. And
They were all at Chapel Hill with you.
yeah, Braxton finished mid-year. He was associate editor of law review. Back then, law review was editor-in-chief, which Rip was, and then 2 associates. And Braxton and Charlie Knox from Charlotte finished mid-year. And that's when I was appointed associate editor, and Paul Johnston was the other associate editor. He later became editor. Paul was the guy who went to New York, made a lot of money. You didn't know him, Rip knew him.
I heard
Anyway,
of them.
anyway, McNeil called Dean Brandis. He says, who would you recommend out of this class that we contact? Back then you could do all this kind of thing, can't do it now. And Dean Brandis said, well, I would suggest you talk to Steve Milliken. So McNeil called me, and I went up and talked to him. And I think Gwen Hoffman up in Hickory talked to him. But I like Greensboro, so I came here. It was Dio's and Judah Smith's request.
Well, then I was going to ask you next. How did you select Greensboro, in which to commence the practice of law?
Well,
You didn't live here. You didn't have any relatives here, so far as
well,
we
my
now know.
mother's from Guilford County.
Well, but that was way back sometime.
Yeah, but I had visited Guilford County because she would come back to her origins.
Ancestral home.
She grew up here at Deep River.
Oh, with Deep River?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's on the west side of the county now.
That's right.
Hall River's on the east side, you know that.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so your mother came from the her aunt family.
And she went to Jamestown High School.
She went, oh yeah, okay. Well, that's one of the old great high schools in this county.
Charlie
Jamestown.
Phillips went there.
Huh?
Charlie Phillips went to Jamestown. You
Yeah,
remember
I'm
him?
sure he did. He was smart enough to get in Jamestown.
Anyway, I like Greensboro as a town, and I thought that the firm had potential. Mr. Smith was still going strong.
Was he going?
He was a dynamite. He was a dynamite.
Yeah,
And he
but
was,
he had the firm going before you arrived.
oh yes, yeah.
I thought so.
Well, Wes Jordan had been with the firm, but had left. And Luke Wright went with him. And,
That's right, Luke.
And Arthur Cook had been with the firm, but when Owen came back out of service, Arthur did. They wanted
They
to
went
work.
together.
They wanted to practice together, so they Arthur left. And also, Mr. Horton had been with the firm. C.R. Horton, that's Dick Horton's father.
Dick's father.
Yeah, but he had left too, so that's the ones I heard they mentioned.
Ernest at Staff had been with the firm.
Oh, yeah, and I forgot him, Arthur Sapp was there, yeah.
Well, Armstead wasn't with the firm at that early
When I
days.
came, he was.
He was?
Armistead Senior, man.
Now, I'm talking about Armstead Senior was with, he
And Beverly Moore.
He and Beverly Moore practiced.
Yeah, but when I got there, Beverly and Armistead both were there.
Yeah, and then Armstead left.
Yeah, and Armistead.
He didn't like
Well,
too many lawyers.
Let me tell you another story. I worked with Armistead Senior when I first got there on a big patent case. Jones Sausage Company of Wisconsin sued Jones Sausage Company of North Carolina.
Infringement case.
Infringement case. And we hardly had gotten into the case when Mr. Sapp was asked to be counsel to a Senate investigative committee. He took off for Washington. And I was very abruptly, and he said, came in, left all the paper on my desk. He said, okay, Steve, you take care of all this. He said, I'm going to be in Washington. Well, I didn't know anything about patent. I had the damnedest time out of that case.
You didn't even take a course in patents, I bet.
No, I didn't. I read it. Of course, I went to the Lanham Act. I read the Lanham Act. You remember that?
Yeah.
Read the Lanham Act. Read a few cases. I read it again.
Mm.
By myself, it's the way you learn.
Well, did you make it, how did you make the decision? Or maybe you never had the choice. One of the things that I've always tried to get out of people when I'm talking to them like you, why did you go into a firm instead of on your own? That's the two ways that used to be able to get into the law practice. You either started on your own or you went in under the tutelage of other lawyers and they took care of you and raised you and got you started out as opposed to starting on your own.
But if I
Now, did you debate that in your own mind?
No, I never even discussed starting on. If I had stayed in Halifax, I would have started on my own, but I had no earthly idea of starting a state in Halifax. I wanted to get to a big town. Greensboro was a big town. There's more action here.
Yeah.
And so but it looked like a good crowd. I mean,
Well, you didn't have to go into a big firm with big important lawyers in Greensboro. You could start it on your own.
I could have, but I'd been
Yeah, a
lost.
lot of them did.
I've been lost here by myself.
No, you
Well,
wouldn't.
look at this opportunity I had, but you don't find better lawyers than Beverly Moore and Judy Smith.
I'm
and
not
Judy
arguing
Smith.
that point.
I
But
recognize
you were protected.
I wasn't protected. I had a
Yes,
lot
you
of,
were.
put on the way, I guess you
They
say.
handed you the cases, didn't
That's
they?
right, that's right. How would I have ever handled been involved with the Lanham Act if I hadn't gone with it?
You ever tried a criminal case?
Yeah, I have.
Capital case?
No, a capital case, no.
You didn't try capital cases.
I never had tried a capital.
Yeah.
But do you remember Mr. Smith Senior?
Mr. Smith?
He was like a bulldog. He would walk up down the hall shaking his head.
Sure, I remember Mr. Smith
He'd
Senior.
leave his office and walk to the end of the hall.
He
turn around and walk back.
He tried a case, 2 or 3 cases in his career.
I'm sure he did.
He did. His
But he-
son never tried any cases.
Now, he was scared to death of the courtroom. Let me tell you what I did to his son, Julius.
Julius Jr.?
Junius the third got to know Judge Armstrong
Oh, yeah.
from having cottages near each other at Long Beach, and they thought the world of each other. I was talking to Judge Armstrong one day. I said, "You know Julius pretty well, don't you?" Yeah. I said, well, how about go along with me on a little practical joke? He said, okay. I said, Julius is afraid of the courtroom. He'd never go close to the courtroom.
Julius the third.
Third, yeah. I said, would you sign an order requiring him to come in and try a case?
Try a case.
He said, he laughed. He said, I don't know. He said, it might upset him. I said, well, that's all right. I'll take care of that.
Sure
So I drew up an order.
That's what we want to do.
That Frank Armstrong signed and had it served on Julius. It damn near caused a heart attack. I was worried to death. But Julius turned right, it was as white as a sheet. And I let it ride for an hour or two, but I finally had to tell him because he was evacuated. Thinking he's going to have to go in and try it. Anyway, Mr. Smith was a bulldog. He'd go down the hall shaking his head like that.
He did
But
shake his
one
head.
funny thing, when I first got there, he called me in his office, and he said, Milliken, said, you're going to be working with Neil Smith, and I want you to know that Neil Smith has a heart of gold. He's a great lawyer. He's smart as he can be. He said, I can't say enough good things about him. He says, I want you to be careful that you are under the good influence that he can exert, not under any bad influences that he might exert. He says he's got some awfully strange ideas. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he belongs to a funny organization. I said, well, for example, what kind of organization? He said, well, the Methodist Church was the first name here. Then he went on to the
He
Civil Liberties
remembered the
Union.
Methodist
Went on
Church.
to the Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, and others, you know, that might be questionable, but the first name you mentioned was Methodist. I've been a Methodist all my life. I said,
You were a third generation
I
Methodist.
couldn't call it keep flat. I said, what's the bit? I'm a Methodist. He said, I know, but Neil Smith has got some funny ideas about things like that. He says you can learn a lot from Neil Smith, but be careful to hit the goal and not the dead. I said, thank
That sounds like Mrs. Smith.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Smith used to go to the post office at 7 o'clock, get the mail before anybody else came to work.
Yeah.
And he wrote them all the mail.
Did you read it?
He read all the mail before we got there. And he saw all the mail going out. And that was the way he kept up with what was going on. He knew what everybody was doing all the time because he read all the outgoing mail and all the incoming.
Now, this is good stuff for this purpose. Somebody
It would be
10,
hard.
15, 20, 50 years from now will learn a lot from what you were just saying
Well, he couldn't do
about
it.
Mr. Smith
Yeah.
and the way his habits in practicing law.
Well, he also, at that early date, was requiring activity page sheets and time sheets. And every day, you'd hand to Mr. Smith your time sheet and the activities, so he would know. And he knew by dark every day what everybody had done that night, that day. And
I didn't realize that about him.
yeah, he kept up with what everybody was doing on.
Even as late as you came here, he
Yeah.
was still doing it.
Yeah, and we used to eat
Did
lunch.
he do that with Welsh Jordan? And,
Well, West is
Yeah.
gone, so I don't know about
well, I know, yeah, but
West
he
was
was.
the exception to most rules. I don't know whether it was.
Yeah.
But we used
What
to eat.
about Armistead Sapp?
Well, he was rather independent too, I think.
Yeah, he was. He didn't stay long.
Well, we used to go to lunch at the King Cotton Hotel.
Yeah, that was his favorite
It
place.
it was a good hotel. It had a good dining room. And one thing I remember about it is Beverly more like sweets, and it had a good chocolate pie, and he loved chocolate pie. He wouldn't order a slice; he'd order the whole pie.
Beverly did.
Yeah, Beverly put the whole pie in front of him, and some days he'd eat the whole thing himself.
Yeah.
But sometimes he would share with
Share
you.
a little of it.
Yeah, this is called small slices, you know, but he would eat either half of it or all of it.
McNeil Smith likes desserts too, didn't he?
McNeil, yeah.
Talk about McNeil's.
Well, the story,
Sharing.
the story, well, of course, if you were sitting at a table with him, too close to him, he would eat off your plate. Ripper's experienced that. Particularly when it got to desserts, he would finish his real quickly, and then he would reach over and start on yours.
Start on yours.
But he did that also at the S&W cafeteria, up
Oh,
on the
yeah.
second floor. One day, Bynum likes to tell this story. Bynum and I both observed it. We were out here, and this lady got up to get some coffee, and it was quite a distance across there, and she sort of disappeared. And Neil kept looking at her table. There was a whole dessert there. You know, he would usually pick up a damaged dessert, you know, somebody had
Somebody eating half of it.
Oh, he couldn't resist. He kept looking at the
Damaged
fire.
dessert.
Nobody came back. So he went over and got the pie, set it in front of him, and started eating it. And this lady came over and said, "What are you doing eating my pie?" And the elder said, "I thought you'd gone home somewhere."
I thought you'd gone over.
But it wasn't unusual for people to, you know, half a slice of pie is enough for a lot of people. They'd leave the other half there. Rip, you've seen that. He'll verify that. But you know, lawyers have certain idiosyncrasies. They're not just ordinary people.
I'd been here less than a week in Mac open. Of course, I was raised here, but I didn't have any connection with any lawyers, any law firms, or anything else, nor did any of my close relatives. They were merchants and other things. And so when I opened a little office on my own in Banner Building, you too young to remember the Banner Building. You remember the Banner
I
Building?
sure do.
Well, anyway,
Mr. Shippen had his office.
that's exactly right. All the leading lawyers in town had their office in the Banner Building. And except for Mr. Smith, he had it over to Jefferson because he'd taken over that account. He took it away from the colonel, you know.
Yeah. But Shippen,
You tell us about that. That's another great Greensboro lawyer story about how the company, that's Jefferson, now Jefferson Pilot, it was just Jefferson then, how Mr. Smith got that account away from Colonel Brooks. So we want you to tell that story.
I don't know that as well as you do.
Oh, don't.
That happened before I came to
You don't need to run from that.
That happened before I came to Greensboro.
Yeah, but well, you see, you don't tell that. That's sensitive, isn't it?
No, I really
And
don't.
it is today, I don't think.
No, I don't think
It
so.
used to be now.
Well,
But anyway,
statute of limitations is run on
it
that.
is run on. It sure, as far as I'm concerned. But you're still practicing law. See, I
Oh, yeah,
retired.
every day.
Every day you're practicing law.
This week I've been putting it on.
Well, anyway, I was going to tell you about
Wheelchair.
McNeil Smith, and then I'm going to be quiet and let y'all talk. McNeil called me and invited Mr. Carnegie. He was very formal and everything. I didn't know Mac, even though we both went to West Market, as you did, church, West Market Church. I was raised in the church. I was there when I couldn't hardly walk up the steps when my Sunday school class was in the old Carnegie library building, which was there behind the church. You don't remember that either.
Yeah, that,
You did?
yes, sir.
You're doing all right.
My memory had gone.
Huh?
My back is gone, but not my
My
mind.
memory's not gone. Well, anyway, for those of you who don't remember, there was a little Carnegie Library behind West Market Street Church, which is now the corner of Friendly Avenue and
Commerce.
yeah,
Commerce there.
the other street runs down Commerce Street. Little street runs down by the church, and anyway, we went. Mac called me and he welcomed me to town. I'd announced that I was going to be practicing law here, and that I'd come through Wake Forest University. It wasn't a university then; it was just a Cal College. It wasn't a Cal College; it was just a
Of course.
yeah, well, it was just a Baptist college. It wasn't Cal College, it was a Baptist college. And I was going to be practicing law here. And so he called, wished me good luck, said he was delighted I was coming to Greensboro, that I'd made a good choice. And he led me along the Primrose Path. He said, now I'd like to tell you, I'd like for you to do me the honor of sharing lunch with me. Tomorrow we'll eat over at the cafeteria. In those days, we had a cafeteria at downtown Greensboro.
And two.
And two, yeah.
Boyd
we had
Morris and S&W.
Boyd Morris and S&W. So we were going to Boyd Morris's, I believe.
Mayfair.
Mayfair cafeteria, right there at the corner of Main Street and North Elm Street and
The corner of Walk and Millwall. The corner of Walk and Millwall.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. And so I met Mr. Smith, and we went over and we shook hands and introduced each other. Got over there, And we go through the line, and he told me to get, no, we didn't go to the cafeteria. We went to one of the restaurants, the regular restaurants there. And that was,
Peter Young's Chinese restaurant.
huh?
Peter Young's restaurant.
No, it wasn't the Chinese restaurant. That was down on Green Street. We went, this was the one down there next to the Jefferson building. And I'll tell you the name of it before. It was a Greek that ran it. And so we went in there and we sat out at the table right in the middle of the whole place.
That was Emmanuel's one.
The manuals, that's it, the manuals. You got it. And we sat down there and the waiter came along, or waitress came along and handed us menus. And Mac said to me, Mr. Smith, said, Mr. Carnegie, you pick out anything you want on the menu and order it. And I said, yes, sir. So I ordered a hamburger steak, I think I did, and with a few French fries, not too many, a few French fries. And the waiter turned to him and he says, I'm telling you, he had a little sack with him, a little paper bag. And he said, no, I have my lunch. He held that thing up. The waitress went off, and we were sitting there and talking about Greensboro and the law practice and law schools and everything. And so he took his sack, put it on the table, right almost in the middle, and peeled it back and opened it up and spread the sack out over the table. And he had a boiled egg in there, a piece of some kind of piece of pie, and 2 or 3 other little items like that. And he started eating one at a time. And he said, now you go ahead and eat what you ordered. Now I'm just going to eat this. And he had a raw apple and he chewed on that a while. And he never did buy anything.
No, he had a glass of water.
He did. He ordered a glass of water. He ordered the water, and that was his lunch.
Let me add to that story. I've seen that many a time. But one day he had about 3 or 4 lawyers from New York City in his office on a conference. And McNeil was behind his desk and he had a door there and he kept cracking it in his drawer. And these lawyers were sitting around and the conference went on and on and on and on. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the New York lawyers were ready to pass out. They finally him up and said, well, Mr. Smith, we want to stop for lunch? And Neil said, well, I've had my lunch. And I've been eating these little crackers with a little nutrition in there. He said, I had my lunch about 12:30.
Did you eat?
And they were about to pass out. They said, we didn't see you eating lunch. He said, well, I've been eating this straw. All the time they were talking. And they couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it.
That's a true story.
It's like the same out-of-state lawyers went to McNeil's for, I think somebody referred to it as a cocktail party. Louisa McNeil always served fruit juice. Bina rib knows about the McNeil Smith fruit juice.
Yeah, he didn't drink any alcohol.
No, but it should, well, all of us knew about it and it was fine. I mean, but these out-of-state lawyers were accustomed to something a little stronger than that.
Oh, yeah, martinis.
They couldn't believe to get out that McNeil's house and drink fruit juice. Anyway, well, let me say something aside. Horace started off this conversation by saying his throat was bothering him and he wasn't going to be able to talk much today. You ought to see him when his throat's right.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
If your throat weren't bothering you, could really talk someday.
I could really talk.
You're kind of handicapped. I've noticed you've been handicapped, son.
I have been. But I hope to recover sooner or later.
I think you've already recovered.
You think so?
You're doing fine.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know.
I can read
But I
Marsh,
used
still not a good friend.
You know, I used to practice, tried a lot of cases over in High Point. And they had that little, they called it a courthouse, but it was just a county building. And that was the day that the High Point Bar, we were sitting around wishing all the time that they had the county seat over there. And they've come a long way towards moving it over there, let me tell you. And I lived through all of that. Silas Casey was over there.
Jim Plants,
Jim Plants.
Silas Casey, Art Shocks.
Art
Julian
Shocks.
Franklin.
Huh?
Julian Franklin.
Yeah, oh yeah, you remember Julian? He'd sleep in his office, and then he'd come and somebody would run him out of his office. It wasn't his office, county office. and somebody would run him out of that. He'd go around and get some other lawyers off. And one day, who was it? Jay Morgan or somebody. They were so mad they couldn't hit the floor with a hat. They were so mad at Julian Franklin. He'd come in there, and it climbed up on top of that desk, and they had all the papers on there, neatly arranged so they knew what to do, working on a big brief. And Julian got up there and kicked all his sleeping, slept on the desk, kicked all the papers off. Everything. You don't remember Julian Franklin?
I knew him well.
You did? Well, I can't tell you anything if you knew him well.
He's a character. Talking about Jim Klein. Jim Klein's not tried the same case 3 times. 3 times, 3 full trials. 3 times. What do you think that case would have been? Yeah, that was before the court of appeal. I thought you were going to ask me some questions. You were going to let Rip ask some questions.
I'm trying to get Rip to ask them. I've already asked you some. I asked you where you went to school. I asked you where you were born. I've asked you
And I
a
told
lot
you,
of very serious
I told you more
questions.
than you wanted to know, didn't I?
No, I'm still hoping you're going to get. I want you to tell about the age-old dispute between the colonel and the other man,
I really don't know that much about it.
Julius Smith.
I really don't.
'Cause that's something, that'd be a tremendous contribution to the literature of the Greensboro Bar.
Well, you'd have to find somebody else to tell that story.
Steve, when you first came to practice, you were sort of saying who was in the firm, but how many members were in the firm when you first came?
I think there were 6.
Mhm.
I think it may now be, it was Officer Stout, Julius Senior and Officer Stout, Beverly Moore. Those 2 had just come.
Mhm.
And then that's 3, and Julius third is 4, Harold Pope is 5, Braxton Bynum is 7, 8. There were 8, including me, 7, 8. Really, that's right.
Anyway, less than half, or maybe 4 over in the other firm, big firm.
So did you and
The two
Bynum
big
come
firms.
together?
Well, Bynum and I, of course, had been good friends at Chapel Hill, and Braxton was his 8 also. But like I mentioned, Bynum was in the V-12 program at Chapel Hill. So during World War II, he was in school, fighting the Battle of Franklin Street, I kiddingly say. But he finished, that kept him from being an active duty during the war. He graduated and got his commission that fall, about the time the war ended. But he was on the USS Iowa battleship for just about 6 months, and then was discharged because the breakfast was over. But not having served any more than that, he was obligated to be recalled. And so when the Korean War started, he was called back into the Navy and was served aboard what they call a rocket ship, a converted LCI that was on with rapid fire rockets, and was in the Warsaw for Korea. But when he left, that left him short-handed at the office. Now I came just after Bynum left, and then he was on active duty probably about a year and a half for 2 years, and came back. So, but Braxton had come a little earlier because Bynum had come first, and then Braxton and me, in that order.
You mentioned about some of the other folks that were from Greensboro in your law class. Who were some of the other people in your law class that you recall? Trying to think of some other statewide folks, some of the folks
Yeah, I
may know.
can tell you who I can remember. Now, a lot of them, I'd say more than half the class is now deceased. But
Mhm.
the last person that died out of that class was Charlie Nye from Durham. I roomed with Charlie one time, and I didn't have a sport coat. I don't think I had any suits anyway. Charlie had a Carolina blue sport coat, and he was very kind to let me wear that sport coat anytime I wanted to. That was
the day. That was
something.
yeah.
And-
Charlie Nye, I remember
Charlie Nye, and then
He represented some contract or
Nello
something.
Nello.
Nello, that's right. That's who it was.
Okay, now Charlie Nye from Durham was a lumberman, really. Charlie had been to West Point and was in some hot battles in Europe. Was heavily decorated for valor, and at one time was the youngest major in the United States Army.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and another one was Dixon McLean from Lumberton. and another one was Dotson Palmer from Charlotte. Dotson was a physical fitness, well, he was on the boxing team out there. And he and I used to go down and work out together.
He's a boxer.
Yeah. I never boxed him, he was better than I was. He was on the boxing team.
Yeah.
And then we had Dean Hamrick from Charlotte, and Charlie Welling from Charlotte. And
Dean Hamrick, did he go to Wake to? He went to Wake Forest.
and me, I went to graduate, went to law school at Chapel.
He went to undergraduate Wake.
And he was called in service during law school to go to Korea. And then we had,
He married one of the Miss North Carolinas.
yeah.
Isn't that the
yeah.
same one we talked
Betty
about?
Betty Jo Ring.
Betty Jo Ring,
From High
yeah,
Point.
from High Point. That's who he married.
Okay, then we had Bill Mills from Concord. He was the guy that had his leg shot off. And
right remarkable the way Bill handled himself without his legs.
yeah.
As I recall, he walked for many years without even being like people knowing that he had lost his
But
legs.
then later life, that stub started getting in trouble. He had a hell of a time with that
Then he
stub.
ended up with a little scooter,
Yeah.
but he continued to practice law.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
And his law partner, who's now a judge, is Irwin Spanier.
Right.
Yeah.
Was Julius Dees, was he before or after
Yeah.
you,
Just 1 year ahead of me.
when you're ahead of you?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was that class ahead of you that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. And Clyde Rollins was 1 year ahead of me.
Okay.
Liv was with him, wasn't she?
And young Julius was 2 years ahead of me. And Ryan was 3 years ahead of me. And then we got, thinking about Days of Greensboro, we had, who else, Rip? Was there? Rip was behind me.
Native of Greensboro? There
Yeah.
weren't many natives of Greensboro at that time.
Well, I named the sheriff.
In law school,
Yeah.
there was one, he didn't go to Carolina, though, he went to Wake. It was one, his mother ran the drugstore.
Joe Bowen was one, he was from Greenville. He ended up practicing law in Hawaii. But he died recently. I checked the obituary column in the paper in the Carolina.
Yeah.
Um, Paul Johnson. Paul ended up being as the chief of law. And Paul was an interesting character. He had been a saxophone player in a dance band, traveled all over the United States playing saxophone. And during that time, he drank a lot, became really an alcoholic. But
Johnson did?
he had Paul was.
Paul did?
He resolved to stop drinking. He did. He didn't drink another drop, and made top grades all the way through law school, and ended up as
Didn't he get it with some governor and
governor from
make a big deal?
governor from Rockingham County. What was his name?
Hodges.
Hodges,
He
yeah.
became Hodges' right
That's
hand
right,
man.
Hodges is
as
right.
secretary in Raleigh, and then he went to Washington with Hodges as Hodges was Secretary of Commerce.
Yeah.
And through that connection, established contacts with some business people who let him buy into the company. And he ended up owning 2 or 3 companies himself, made a lot of money. And I know the exact figures because I have his estate, the Joe and Holly job.
Steve, I was gonna have you just cut in here a little bit. And I'm impressed with your work ethic. I know up until, recently, you said if you go into work at 7 in the morning, you work till 7 at night. If you went in at 8 in the morning, you work till 8 at night. Basically, that was a routine day for you. I know you worked some on weekends.
I was just trying to keep up with Rip.
Yeah, talk about when you first started doing that schedule and how how long you did that, because that's a pretty awesome schedule to have all that energy.
I don't know that I would do it every day, but all those other things. I stopped. Now, when you're married, you have to do what your wife says a lot of times, because I was married twice.
She who must be obeyed, of course.
Yeah, so sometimes I get called home by 6 instead of staying at 8 and that kind of thing. So, you have to kind of ride with the circumstances.
Yeah.
It wasn't unusual for Rip to do the same thing. He's work from 8 to 8 or whatever. You do whatever it takes. If you're writing a brief for Supreme Court.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember McNeil. McNeil was a great lawyer, a good man, but he was usually running late, And I remember several times that he and I together had cases in the Supreme Court. And we'd be writing that brief for the Supreme Court all night long when it was due by noon the next day. We'd write it and keep the two secretaries up there. And we'd be writing that brief all night, all day, and all night long. And jump in the car about 9 o'clock next morning and race to Raleigh and have it filed by noon.
You jump in your car, not his.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, most of the time he didn't have a car.
That's right.
Who, Matt?
Yeah, he didn't have a
He
car.
had his bicycle.
They had one
He
car.
rode his bike.
Yeah. Not
He used to
too
wait for Annie Ben to come along. If it's raining, he'd wait till she came along, and then he'd stop. She had a station wagon, and he'd stop her and put the car, the bicycle in. That's her station wagon, and tell her where she wanted him to take her.
But talking about
Tell her where
racing,
he wanted her to take her.
talking about racing to Raleigh, I mean, Neil and I were racing to the Supreme Court one morning after staying up all night. We went on 64 through Siler City, and I was driving a little bit fast, I guess, because it was getting late, and we got stopped and got a ticket. Well, Judge Moody was the district
You
court
remember
judge.
him?
Jack Moody
Jack Moody.
had been in my class in law school. And he flunked out and had to finish law school in Richmond. But Jack and I were good friends. And but he got his degree from Richmond because he flunked out at Chapel Hill. But Jack's father was the district court judge. So, and Judge Moody knew me through his son. So I wrote a letter to Judge Moody and told him that the circumstances, we were running late to get to the Supreme Court. Now, as a lawyer, he would understand the need for being there on time and all this kind of thing. And he wrote a nice letter back. He said, well, I'm dismissing your case. He says, we've got a beautiful county here in around Siler City. And he says, you couldn't have been observing the scenery as fast as you were going. The next time you come to this place, please slow down so you can look at the scenery as you come through.
That's what Judge Moody said.
Yeah.
Well, that leads into some other characters that I'm sure you knew, like Siler City. Who am I thinking about now? The one that was always in the news, a comical character. I've got the way I can't remember all
You're
this.
not thinking of Chubb Sewell.
Chubb Sewell.
Chubb Sewell.
Chubb Sewell.
Carthage, Carthage.
Pinehurst.
Huh?
Yeah, Carthage or Carthage.
I tried several cases.
Otto Burton.
Yeah, he was.
Not Siler City, Carthage.
Now there's one that I can tell you more stories about you want to hear.
Otway Burton.
Otway Burton.
Otto Burton.
He and Judge Russo. And you know, Judge Russo quit the Supreme Court. I mean the Superior Court because of Otway. And I was a personal witness to that. I think we probably ought to preserve that for the record because they did not get along. Judge Russo called Otway Burton Outlaw Burton, and he just couldn't.
One of the judges refused to be assigned to Randolph County.
That was Russo. Russo, he came, and I was a solicitor during those days, and I was very close to Judge Russo. For some reason, I never could understand quite why. He had sort of a liking for me. He'd want to go to lunch. He wouldn't like to go to lunch with a bunch of lawyers. He just stayed away from them. He said, Horace, you and I are going to lunch. So he'd go down and he'd tell me stories, you know. He didn't like to broadcast a lot of this stuff around. But he'd tell me some stories you wouldn't believe about various judges and lawyers and people like that. So this time, he, I forgot. I
That with Chillywoods Baden in that case? Chili Baden in that case? Or
No,
was
he
that
wasn't.
with Otway? Or
You're talking about Otway,
I'm
weren't you?
talking about Otway Burton.
Right.
And,
took you back in chambers?
yeah, but he was involved in some of them, but not the one I was trying to tell you about because I've forgotten what it was now. He,
You want me to tell one while you're thinking?
yeah, you tell one right. I think is that.
Well, Otway, I tried to write many cases against Otway, but one time he took, this was right before you could take unlimited number of dismissals, the plaintiff could, now it's restricted to one. But back then you could take unlimited number, and he took it was either 3 or 4 dismissals on the same case. You get into the case, and things weren't going to suit him, he'd stand up and take a dismissal. We'd come back and get on the calendar again, we'd start the trial, go through a little ways, things weren't suiting him, so he'd take a dismissal. He took either 3 or 4 dismissals. And of course, each time I would have to get ready, it made me fury. I'd cuss him out, he just didn't grin.
You could do it during the trial, you could take a dismissal?
Yeah, right up to the time the jury brought back a verdict.
Yeah,
Unlimited, no.
that's the way it used to be.
He'd get a free run. He'd
Now,
get up.
dismiss, Judge, I'm gonna take a dismiss. And the judges, it wasn't in discretion of
No,
the
you
judge.
couldn't stop it.
You couldn't stop it.
Steve, one thing I think you can tell us about, and I think this is a great honor for you among all your honors you've received, and it meant a lot to me that you invited me down about a year ago. You were inducted into, I'm not sure if it's called the Hall of Fame, but the Hall of Honor at the North Carolina State Bar Association, and that was a tremendous honor, and you were nice enough to, I believe, sponsor that luncheon
Yeah.
for.
Well, I say that's not any real big credit to me. It was an honor, it's true, but it was done at the instigation of my partners, and I'm certainly grateful
Money.
to them for doing that, for selecting me to be the one to do that. But it wasn't because
Now I done got
it
the
wasn't
big
because of
deal.
anything I
Very
deserved.
highly deserving, I
It
mean,
was
Alan
deserved.
Duncan did a nice introduction, and your family was there, and
But it was, I have to agree, it was an honor, and I'm certainly grateful to everybody who participated in it, but I'll have to give credit to my partners on that.
yeah, don't be too modest now. You deserved it for all the stuff you've done in the legal
We
profession.
sure did.
But we're talking about Chubb Sewell. I can tell you a couple of good stories on Chubb. Chubb was representing a lady who owned property in Pinehurst, which was a private town. It was only a private town in North Carolina, I guess. And it was not incorporated. And it had dirt streets. And of course, the owners could do anything they wanted to in the town because they owned the property. Well, they had chosen to regrade a street that ran by this lady's house. I don't think they really regraded it, but they scraped it or did something to smooth it out. But she contended that it diverted water wrongfully onto her property. And she brought suit with Chubb representing her, and she was kind of a kooky lady. She had a lot of money, but I remember one expression she used, that she followed the sun. If it got cold, she'd go to Florida or somewhere. Got that hot there, she'd come out, I followed the sun, I followed the sun. Anyway, she was hard of hearing, and Chubb was too at that time. The suit was that the town had wrongly diverted the water, and it had caused damages in the form of causing her books in her library, the pages to stick together, and it gave the cat rheumatism, and it caused her shoes to mildew, and it caused her mother, who was living with her at that time, to have some kind of health problem, and it caused the drapes to be mildew. Well, we called in experts, and there was some fellow who was from Canada who had been a chief engineer on the building Holland Tunnel, so he he's moved from Canada to Pinehurst, and but he was a celebrity because he built the Holland Tunnel. Well, he was her expert.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I either took a deposition to talk with him, I'm not sure which. If I talked with him, of course, it was with the permission of Chubb. But we got in the courtroom, and it was the biggest. George Fountain from Tarboro was presiding. Remember George? And with her being hard of hearing and Chubb being hard of hearing, he would shout questions to her as loud as he could, and sometimes she would understand it, and sometimes not. But his questions were statements. I mean, his question would go on and on and on and on, and nobody could stop it. I would object, and George Fountain would say, "Objection sustained." And Chubb would keep going, and the judge would pound his gavel down and stand up and say, "You got to stop." And Chubb either didn't hear him or didn't care. And the question was a statement.
Both, you has both.
A statement. And the lady would then try to answer, and it might be an answer, it might not be, but it was a wild scene. And Chubb brought all these paper bags into the courtroom. And every now and then he would turn one upside down. And bunch of shoes would come out of one bag, and the dust would fly everywhere. Another bag with a bunch of dresses would come out, and dust would fly everywhere. The next bag, a bunch of drapery would come out, and dust would fly everywhere.
Motel?
It was a show. And, but the funniest part was nobody could stop him or stop her. The judge would sustain the objection, and Chubb would keep going, and the lady would keep going, because I don't think he was wrong with anything you ever said. But it was, George Fountain was so exasperated that he couldn't hardly stand it. About the third day, he dismissed the case. He said, I've heard, I've had all this language down, I'm going back to talk about it.
Yeah. Fountain was a good judge. He was a good judge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have you thought of the rest of your story yet?
I hadn't thought of it. It must not be much of a story.
Well, you're halfway through it, you gotta finish it.
I know, but I forgot.
The anxiety is
What was
probably
it was about Chubb?
I think you talking about Otway Burton and Chubb both.
Yeah, well, they had two good subjects.
I'll tell you about Otway while you're still thinking about your story.
Tell me about Otway.
I got a call from Roberta, who was a courtroom clerk in Asheboro. And I had several motions on the calendar. And I had to understand with Roberta that I would be there at 2 o'clock, or if the judge needed me earlier, she would call me. Other than my going down there waiting. She was good about that. And so she called me about 11 o'clock, and she said, Steve, we've had a calendar call, and Otway Burton stood up and said that you had agreed with him that every one of your motions on him be decided in his favor. She said, that doesn't sound like you. I said, it ain't me. She says, well, you better get out of here, because the judge took his word for it. And I said, well, I'll be there as fast as I can get there. And before I left the office, I called Otway on the telephone. And he asked, you got on the phone? I said, Otway, you lying son of a bitch. What did you tell the judge? Oh, I said, did you tell him that I agreed there? Well, I thought you had. I said, I call every kind of name I could think of. I mean, top of my voice. And one of my partners, I found who it was, came around the corner, says, you don't need the telephone. As loud as you're talking, he can hear you without the telephone. But I went on down there, and we had the biggest fracas in the courtroom with Otway trying to explain why he told the judge that.
Did he really tell the judge that?
Yeah. Well, the judge, of course, quickly
He's a
took my
bigger
word.
rascal.
When I got there, the judge quickly took my word for it. I had
Yeah,
to-
of course, he wouldn't. It wasn't Russo, was it?
I don't know who it was.
Russo didn't like Otway. He called him outlaw.
Do you know any Superior Court judge who did?
Who liked Otway? No, I don't.
He gave everybody a hard time.
I know. And he, they beat him up, and the lawyers, what was it they did? They found somebody in contempt. Said they had to do that to protect the rest of the bar. Somebody, I forget.
Hal Walker.
Hal Hammer Walker. Yeah, that's who it was.
Hal had him locked up.
He had him locked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Otway came down the steps down there one day, and one of his clients, a former client, was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Just as Otway stepped off the bottom of the stairs, he cut him with his fist and knocked him down and broke his jaw.
Yeah, he did. He did. Well, he had accused a man of doing something to his wife or something. I forget. What is it, a domestic case?
Well, is Otway the one that Bob Cahoon represented, or am I mixing up the story? Who's that? Bob?
Yeah, I think he did. I think Bob's about the only one we represented.
I think he told us that story, didn't he?
Yeah, he told the story when we interviewed him.
Bob.
I'm glad you mentioned Bob Cahoon, because he is one of the real characters of the Greensboro Bar.
Well, we had a good session with him.
I tried several cases with Bob. He's always very accommodating, very straightforward, completely honest. Didn't try to stall or flim flam anything. He laid the cards on the table.
He'll lay him right on
I've
there.
settled cases with Bob, or tried cases with Bob, but always in the greatest respect for him.
He's a good lawyer.
I trusted him implicitly.
You did. I did too. Now, he'd worry you to death.
That's right. You might not
He'd
answer.
worry you to death in a criminal case now.
They might not answer your telephone calls, but when you caught up with him, he was just nice to stick with him. I rode horses with he and I in Sedgefield Hunt together. We
Mm-hmm.
used to ride the Sedgefield Hunt.
You rode to the hunt.
Yeah, with Bob Gunn.
Mm-hmm.
How many people could say they rode horses with Bob Gunn?
You, the only one I know.
Owen Lindley is another character of the Greensboro.
Well, we haven't talked about Owen lately.
Owen,
have we?
one story about Owen was, and Bob, talking about Bob Coon reminded me of it. Owen used to camp out in Bob's outer space. Bob had two offices, an office and a waiting room. And Owen used to go down there and sit in Bob Coon's waiting room. And one day he was sitting there trying to pick up business, I guess. One day a lady came in, and Owen was sitting there, sat down, and in a few minutes she said, well, where's Mr. Coon? And Owen said, I'm not sure, he probably is not in, but do you have some business with him that I could help with? And she thought he was Bob's assistant, I guess, the way he presented it. And she said, yeah, I'm going to get a divorce. Well, Owen said, well, I can take care of that. And Mr. Coon maybe is not able to see you right now, but I'll be sure that he understands and we'll take care of it. Said, it'll be $200 in advance. So she gave him, Owen $200. And Owen put it in his pocket and left. Never told Bob about it. In fact, 3 or 4 months later, the lady called Bob and said, what about my divorce? Bob said, what is your name? What did you say your name was? He said, I don't believe I'll go represent you. No, I don't think you ought to talk to me. She said, well, there's some fellow sitting in your waiting room that said that he would get, that you would get a divorce. And Bob immediately knew who it was. I mean, he said, your fellow told you he'd get a divorce? She said, yeah. He said, well, if he said it, I'll get you a divorce. I went ahead and handled it for her, got a divorce, and never said anything to no one, just let him keep doing it. I mean, he told the story on Owen, but he let him keep the $200.
You let him keep the 200?
Yeah.
And,
He was worth $200 about the whole story on Owen.
that's right, he really was. He really was, yeah.
Tell us about your children. It says you in the 68 directory here that you have 3 children.
Leslie, I've been married twice. I've got 3 children by the first wife. And my wife, present wife, Sally, has 2 children by another marriage. So we have 5 together, but Sally and I don't have any together. With 5, we start off with 5 little ones that were ages 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. We figured 5 was better than we could handle.
Yeah.
So I wish now we had gone on, but at that time, 5 seemed like a lot, and it was.
Yeah, well,
Particularly when I had over 5 of them in college at the same time.
yeah.
Yeah. But Leslie is the oldest, that's my child. She is a nurse at Coon Hospital. She works in surgical intensive care and loves it. She loves that work. She catches heart patients right at the operating room.
Mm.
And then the next one, Steve Jr., has 2 degrees at Chapel Hill, and he's with a company that does contract work for drug companies. I can't remember the name of it, but he's in a management position, done real well. Yeah, I think he's done well. He drives a BMW, the biggest BMW, but he just bought a house at the beach. I don't know what he makes, but I'm assuming he does. He's done well. If you own a big BMW and a house at the beach, that's
He's doing all right.
He's prima facie some evidence. And then John is a PhD. He went to school, went to college about 15 years. He finally got his PhD, went back through for college. Smart boy, but he just couldn't decide what he wanted to do. He's got a psychology practice in Fairfax, Virginia. And he's married and has 1 child. Outside his 2 children, Lynn, the girl, was an airline stewardess. But she's got 3 children, so with the 3rd one, she had to start flying. And she lives in Raleigh, and her husband is a very successful man in the insurance business. So that's 3 of Sally's grandchildren. And then Marty, Sally's son, owns an insurance agency with 2 outlets in Raleigh, and is doing real well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming he is too from the big
The car he drives.
SUV he just bought.
Oh, you got him an SUV now?
Plus, just bought a new house.
The beach?
No, just in Raleigh. So I'm assuming, again, just from the evidence I observed, he must be doing pretty well.
Yeah.
So
Well, you've amassed quite a stash of money out there, you know, that you put your fingers
I
on
mean-
it if you need to.
Well, it would be a gift from them, because I spent a lot on it trying to get them educated.
I know it. You've done your part.
I told them I'd give them all the education they can stand, but don't expect anything beyond that.
Yeah.
But they all done well.
So how many grandchildren do you have then?
Well, Side children have, Marty has one child, and Lynn has 3, so they're 4 grandchildren. Of course, I consider her children just like mine, because I took them over when they were about 6 or 7 years old.
You raised it.
I don't distinguish one from
You
the
know,
other.
yeah, I know. Once you
At that age,
look after them for so long,
yeah.
it all blends
When
in.
you take them over at 5 or 6 years old, it's
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
I had a time getting them all through school. I don't understand it.
Where'd they all go to school? They go close by, or they
They
want
all
to go
went to state.
somewhere
Yeah,
else?
the 2 boys finished, my 2, John and Steve, finished Chapel Hill.
They got in all right.
Yeah, yeah. John had gone to the Hill School, so he got early admission at Chapel Hill. Both of them were students. And then Leslie finished at UNCG, Lynn at UNCG, and Marty State. So it all went to state school. But all of them in school at one time, and all of them got extra degrees. Marty didn't get an extra degree, but it still took him 6 years to finish.
Yeah. Well, he did well. I mean, he learned a lot.
Oh, yeah. Had a good time, too.
Yeah, and had a good time.
Anyway, I started to say that I made a deal with the banker friend that he would stick with me until all of them were educated. And he did. He kept his word. And that's where we got it all through school.
That's good.
Finally paid off the note.
You finally paid off the note.
Took a lot of time.
Oh, no. Over there in the Smith firm, you did well over there. That's what everybody said.
Well can mean a lot of things. I did better than I deserved, let's put it that way.
Gosh. Yeah. Well, I tell you, this has been a great discussion, and it's a little different than most of them. It's gotten into things that I didn't realize initially, but it's good to get into. We've told things about practices and things that have happened here in the law business in Greensboro, the law profession. I should be more careful with the choice of my words. We don't want to be businessmen, we're professional men.
You know, I think that's one shortcoming of the legal profession. It's become too much business. Too
Oh,
much
no
profession.
question about that.
Everybody's looking at the bottom line, and the cost of practicing law has gone so much. One thing that's running up is in litigation, there's too much discovery. When
Oh, you're
Rick
right
and I
about
started, there's very little discovery. We get in a file that would be no more than thicker than this, and we thumb through it and pick up the names and meet the client and the witnesses at the courtroom. And a lot of times I'd try a case, the case be called for trial, I'd stand up in front of the courtroom and says, "Is Mr. Smith here who'd be my client?" I hadn't even seen him before. I had a statement.
Mm-hmm.
And you put them on a stand and you had to sign statements. And you try the case, there'd be no discovery, no interrogatory, no deposition. And now everybody serves you interrogatories and requests to produce for everything you could. Most of them had nothing to do with the case. And you take depositions instead of a 30-minute, hour deposition, you want to go all day. One thing that has absolutely ruined litigation from a time standpoint, from a cost standpoint, is discovery.
You're right about that.
I mean,
Now, I don't know what you younger lawyers do. Do you all do all that discovery business?
I do criminal defense, so it's nothing like the civil.
Well, I know, you and I, my background is the
pretty much
same.
try cases now like I'm talking about. You got a file and you know the names of the people, you know basically what they're gonna say. You don't know every detail. You don't know where they were born or what your mother's name was, and it doesn't make a name. You go in and get to the main points and move on. But I tell you now, you can spend 2 years in discovery. People that are deposed.
Well, they wear them out. The theory now, among a lot of lawyers, younger lawyers, is the only way to defend the client is to wear the case out. It's not a question of whether he's right or wrong, or whether he ought to pay anything or not pay anything.
Well, a lot of companies
It's-
refuse to litigate because they'd rather capitulate and settle.
Yeah, it's
because
cheaper.
Because litigation costs are so high.
That's right, it's cheaper to settle than, and pay off than it is to,
I
just to
think-
go through
I
it
think
and
discovery-
get justice.
Discovery has ruined litigation.
Yeah.
Steve, what do you think about this discovery problem as it relates now to the onset of the dispute resolution of cases rather than the trial of lawsuits?
I think mediation is disposing of a lot of cases years ago would have been tried. I think mediation has been very successful in other alternative methods of resolving disputes. It's been very successful in disposing of disputes that years ago would have been tried. Mediation does settle a lot of cases.
Some of the problem is, of course, that some people don't want to mediate until they finish discovery, which is counterproductive.
It sure is. It really is.
I wonder if you have a feel about that.
Well, I think if discovery gets too burdensome, the lawyer ought to go to the judge and lay the facts out on the table and say, rather than spending all this time, let's just sit down and lay the cards on the table. I'm dealing with a lawyer in Charlotte right now in a case. He and I have agreed just to voluntarily exchange information, not go through all this. Just I'll tell him what I know, and he can tell me what he knows. We'll try to get rid of the case, and not serve interrogatories and take depositions.
Steve, tell us a little bit about the sort of the evolution of your practice over the years in terms of the type of cases that you've been involved in, and you've already mentioned some of them, but just some of the type of cases that you've been involved with, and if that's changed any from early days of your practice till later years.
Well, the whole practice has changed. I came to Greensboro thinking I was going to be a business lawyer because I had liked that type of course, taxation, I got that. But the need was for litigating rather than business. I guess practicing was kind of good. So you do what you have to do. So I started trying cases. And at that point, the firm had a lot of insurance company clients. And so, of course, that's a high volume type thing. You try a lot of workers' compensation cases initially. I traveled all over the state trying workers' comp cases. Jim McCaffrey was a broad insurance company representative. Had a lot of he had cases all over the state. He and I would leave Greensboro Monday morning and follow the commissioners all over the state, go all the way to the coast and all over in the mountains, and I'd come back on Friday afternoon. I would have tried probably, say, 25 or 30 workers' comp cases during that week. And then there were a lot of automobile accident cases, a lot of slip and fall type cases, and product liability cases, and commercial disputes. Lawyers now tend to zero in and be an expert in a brake failure on a General Motors car. They don't know anything about the accelerator and the other thing. But it's amazing how lawyers specialize in that. When Horace and I started, and I guess when Rip started, if you were a trial lawyer, you tried anything that came in the door.
Anything came up.
It might be a domestic dispute, or it might be a commercial litigation, or it might be a slip and fall, or a automobile accident. But now lawyers restrict themselves just to one type case, which is a strange phenomenon to me.
Used to have to be.
That's one of the changes, the specialization. Lawyers, I guess they know more, and maybe they're better qualified, but they don't have as much fun. Is the real.
Steve.
There's a lot of fun and excitement in doing a lot of different things.
Yeah, you get a diversity in it. And one other thing, and I don't want this to end without asking you a few questions about your military. I'm not talking about stuff you've already talked about, but give us any views you have on the military, the important part of it, and the fact that you have, within the last 3 or 4 years, I'm pulling that out of the air, you correct me if I'm wrong, have put together here in Greensboro, and you're entitled to all of the credit, every bit of it, put together an organization. You call them, I don't know where you got that name, Black Cat, not Black Cat, but the Black Hat.
Well,
Black Hat.
I've got a military cap that's black. It says United States Navy.
Yeah.
USS George A. Johnson, 583, right across the front.
Is that where your name came from?
Yes,
Well, and you got me started. You gave me a 100th Infantry Division cap.
That's right, sure did.
I don't know where you got it, but you got all of my decorations on it and everything, which I have and protect and take care of. And I'm going to wear it up to Washington. I want you to know this. This coming Wednesday, I'm leaving here by the train and going all the way into D.C. I'm going over there to that hotel where the convention is, or the thing,
100th Infantry,
in 100th Infantry Division.
one of the most
and
famous
we go-
divisions in the Army.
Hmm?
One of the most famous divisions.
That's right, you're exactly right. Lost more and did more, and
Ours was a heavy machine gunner.
I was a machine gunner, and I ended up,
Took a German bullet through his leg.
huh?
You're right, you took a German bullet right through your leg.
Yeah, right, 88 shell. Brick, you know, all that. But anyway, that visit May, I just thought you as a great citizen of this community, you've made such a wonderful contribution to the professional life of the community, but you've done a lot of other things that some people have steered away from. They've made a lot of money like you have. They've done a lot for their profession,
That's one thing I've
whether it's law or medicine or whatever.
I
But
have-
you've done more than most anybody I know in taking care of the community itself.
Well, you've been over the generous.
No, I'm not. No, I'm
I
not.
have tried to contribute some, like to the Methodist Church and Art Association,
You have.
Greensboro College. and-
You're big. I should have gotten into that because I'm in the same church with you. I've done a lot of things, and I've watched you.
The only thing you said was wrong was for two things. One, I haven't made a lot of money. And second, I haven't done a whole lot compared to what other people have done. I've just done the best I could.
Well, you're too modest. You're just too modest. But anyway, tell us about, if there's anything that has guided you, and I know how most of us are, those who really saw the action and were participating and all that, we are very reluctant to even talk about it. And you may have heard my little speech, and it's off the top of my head, so it wasn't well done. But the time I spoke to the group, or some group, and told them about what happened and why we in World War II did not toot our own horns. We didn't do that, you know, and I didn't use that term, but we, you know what I'm talking about?
But one reason I
Well,
started,
it was 50 years
Yeah.
before I ever said a word about my experiences in World War II.
well, that's two reasons. One, we all came back, felt like we were glad the war was over. We'd done a good job. It was a just war. It was the right thing to do. We were proud of what we did. But we went to school, went to work, and
Yeah, we had to go make a living.
Sure, nobody thought much about it.
We
But
wasn't
as you
looking
get
for
as you
somebody.
get older, when you hit my age and yours, you start reminiscing about the old times.
Well, that's true.
So part of it is the reluctance to, I mean, you're busy with other things. You get your age of mind, you start reminiscing. And that's, we're both victims of that. But the second thing is, a lot of guys didn't want to think about it because it was too fresh in their minds. And they've been reluctant to say anything, but more and more are talking now. And one reason I started the Black Cap group was to get people to put down in writing what their experiences were, and I've been successful. A lot of people have written out their stories
You've got a lot of
at my promptings who had declined to do so earlier. But if you start exchanging stories, like you gave me your story and I gave you mine, it encourages other people to do the same thing. And to give you an illustration, about 2 weeks ago, Steve Robertson, who's a retired neurosurgeon, he had a lot of action in Vietnam, and he said he had never told anybody a lot of things, but he and I were talking, and he started telling me things about Vietnam that he had never disclosed to anybody. I said, Steve, you've got to put this down in writing. He said, I've been reluctant to do so, but talking to you, it's caused me to start wanting to do that.
Yeah.
And Bob Heights wrote a book about this thick on his experience.
I know Bob is, of course, he's an educator to begin with.
And I tell you, another guy, Jim Rich, is about 6'8", but he's about 300 pounds. He could walk through that door without even opening it. He flew combat helicopters, gunships in Vietnam. He was shot down, and several of his buddies were killed. He got this Silver Star and Distinguished Flying Cross. And more others you could say. You wouldn't believe he'd be soft-hearted, but he is. But he said, I've never been able to talk to anybody about this, he said, until I joined the Black Hat group.
Black Hat Group, yeah.
He said, but you have prompted me to start talking until we're in.
So what was the group that you've got is composed of who?
Well, about 4 or 5 of us met one morning for breakfast, just shooting the bull, like you do. And somebody heard about it and said, well, how about let me join you next time? But it started off with 4 or 5, and now I've got on the
Yeah, you
mailing
got 400
list.
or 500.
I've got about 250.
250.
But the list changes. I'm adding new people and dropping people all the time.
Is this a formal group or are you just?
It's a one-man operation. I do
That's no.
all the mailing and arranging. To give you an illustration, on June the 4th, which is 2 days from D-Day anniversary, I was scheduled a breakfast at the Greensboro Country Club in which D-Day will be emphasized. I've got 4 guys who were landed on D-Day, ready to stand up and tell that experience. And that's the type of programs we have. And also, I've arranged for a memorial service at the Veterans Memorial at Country Park on May 30th, which is Memorial Day. And I've done that completely. I've done it under the auspices of the Black Cap.
It was Black Caps.
And I've got...
And what do you call the group? Black Caps?
Black Caps.
Black Caps.
C-A-P-S.
That's it, Black Caps?
Yeah, right. Just imagine that cap is black with U.S. Navy across the front. And blue Dennis bars on each side, 7 ribbons across the front. But Memorial Day, I've got a program set up with I'll open the ceremony. I've got 2 guys coming to speak. One's the Brigadier General, and I'll make a few remarks, and Howard Coble will make a few remarks. We've got the honor guard from the VFW Post 11530. There are about 14 guys, and usually 8 or 10 of them come dressed in uniform with rifles and the beagle and bow caps and go through the drill and so forth. And I've got the one where that post is going to sing our national anthem. And I've got, let's see, I've got the honor guard, and I've got 2 speakers. I can't remember the whole program right now. Anyway, I mailed out notice. You got it done.
Yes.
I mailed it notice.
Yes.
Rips on the mailing list. Anyway,
This is impressive.
the way it
Impressive
works
thing
is
he's done.
it's very informal. I always ask for suggestions, and people do make suggestions, which I try to make. But it's easier to go ahead and do something than it is to try to draw 200 people. The committee is frequently inefficient.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more thorough, but it's inefficient. And I always figured that with my secretary's help, I can get out the stuff.
You do a magnificent job, I'll tell you that.
But some of these guys on my list have really been through a lot of combat.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of,
And others do a lot of traveling, but it doesn't matter whether they're in combat or not. If they are interested in being active, that's fine. And we got people from World War II, from Korea, from Vietnam. And one of the speakers recently had been active in the Gulf War, Colonel Orris, who resigned as head of
we heard him.
Yeah, he gave a great talk.
I thought he gave a good talk, too.
He went into detail. He's West Pointer. He's very well advised. And one thing he told was in his drive over on a stroke across the desert, and they spotted one Iraqi who ran when he saw him, and they started chasing him, and he disappeared. So they said, where did this guy go? So they went closer, and they saw a hole in the ground. So that guy jumped into a tunnel. So Colonel Orris said he jumped in after him, and the guy fired at him just as Orris fired. Orris had his pistol. The Iraqi missed him, but he hit the Iraqi and killed him. But there wasn't just one guy in the hole, there were 27 in there. But the other 20, he killed the first one, the other 26
They retired,
surrendered.
surrendered.
And one of them was,
Yeah.
a high-ranking Iraqi general.
Yeah,
So he said, I was the hero of the day. I captured the general in the Iraqi army.
that was good. That was a good day's work.
Yeah. Anyway, it's that kind of thing. We get people who had interesting experiences like that. Like I say, we had these 3, I mentioned Jim, what was Jim's last name? Anyway, we had Carl Seeger, and
Seeger, you had
and
him.
Jim Baker, and Jim, what did I say?
I can't remember the
The
other.
big guy I told you about. Anyway, the
Say
three-
8 feet, not 8 feet.
Jim Rich?
Jim Rich.
Jim Rich.
Those three, all flew helicopters in Vietnam. And they brought a helicopter with them. Baker,
Had it out there. At the
they some way
hotel,
secured
at the restaurant.
an absolute authentic helicopter gunship. It has the guns on it, and arm and everything. That they haul around on a trailer. And they brought that helicopter to the, parked it outside of our meeting, and all three of them told stories about their combat flying in Vietnam. That was a good program.
Mm-hmm.
Good program. I record all this. I got tapes and videotapes and sound tapes. Type it up. I can produce exactly what R said when he talked. We had three people today he talked, or two people. Bill Ditto.
Bill Ditto talked
Bill
about
Ditto was a Marine
in
lieutenant.
Japan.
He was
I
in
mean, in the Pacific.
Okinawa. Bill Ditto was in the first wave at Okinawa.
Yeah.
And was in combat about 60 straight days, wasn't
I
he?
forget.
I think 3/4 of the time.
Right many days.
Yeah. Anyway, Bill talked all
He
about
didn't get
pictures.
shot up like I did.
No.
He got me. Stayed.
Jim Wolf was a Marine
Yeah.
and was in the first wave that he was in.
He was in Ewo.
And Jim won.
And he never got hit.
Jim's got a story though about one of his fellow lieutenants standing next. It was within this distance of each other, standing this close to each other. The bullet hit his friend right in the neck. Blood spurted out and he dropped dead right at his feet.
Right there.
We've got a lot of guys who have seen extensive combat and been wounded. And Curly Dickinson will talk to you. Curly was in
Curly
the Avro
T.
when they jumped into Normandy
Care to take
the day
one of them
before,
hits.
the day before June 6th. He made
a
six.
jump in Europe, every jump in Europe. From North Africa all the way through
North Africa, Sicily.
Sicily, Italy,
Belgium, Holland.
Belgium, Holland.
He made
The
6
last
or 7 combat jumps.
Yeah, and never got wounded. I don't
Yeah,
think
he
he,
was. Yeah, he was.
was he wounded?
Yeah.
Yeah, he got a Purple Heart, didn't he? But he was something.
Anyway, that's what we do. It's just, to me, it's just a hobby, a fun thing to do. But it does seem that a lot of the people like it.
Yeah.
And some
Well,
don't, I mean, you know.
Well, the camaraderie of it. You see people you know. And I've seen a lot of people I never knew. I didn't realize that we had as many former good soldiers and good military people around here as we do.
Well, you got a lot of guys here. They take Ed Carson. You never know Ed Carson?
Yeah.
Ed was a D-Day guy. He went in on Utah Beach. His brother Johnny went with him. They were in the same division.
They got captured.
On the beach, Johnny got shot through the hip and put him out of life. Ed didn't get hit till he was off the beach in the hedgerows, he said. But Ed got hit and was in the hospital a short time and went back with his unit and later was captured. He was a prisoner of war for almost a year. I
Almost
guess.
a year.
But one thing I'll tell you about Ed, he wrote a funny letter back to Bynum. He and Bynum was good friends. The letter he wrote, I don't know all they could think, but one statement he made was that this place is so awful, that he used some expletives.
That was when he was a prisoner of war in Germany.
From the prison, he wrote, this place is pretty bad. He wasn't using stronger language then. He said, if I could get out of this, if it would help me get out of this goddamn place, I'd be willing to live in High Point and go to Duke University.
How about it?
In their prices, I'd be willing to go live in High Point and go to Duke University.
Did he really? Now, I've often wondered.
Yes.
I've heard that for years and years.
That is a true
Whether he
story.
really did it or whether that's an afterthought. of
Bynum
somebody.
swears he got hit. Bynum swears too.
Well, yeah, okay. Okay. But I think it's one of the best statements to come out of World War II. Yeah.
I was going to tell you
Now,
what
did-
distinguished company that you've been in terms of the interviews that we have previously done. We've done Beverly Moore, McNeil Smith, Charlie Hagan, Dick Douglas, Owen Cook, Bob Cahoon, Margaret Harris, Carmen Stewart, Horace Carnegie, who you
I thought you
sitting
were
beside here.
interviewing Horace today. We're interviewing you.
He gets frequently interviewed, so we actually did him as one of our subjects, though.
I'm kidding you. You talk all you want to.
And Gus Malin and Elton Edwards.
And that's a distinction, I don't deserve to be in that group.
Oh, yeah.
But I do feel honored that you asked me to respond.
Sure.
But that's a good group as you
Gus, let me tell you about Gus Bennett. Gus is one of our regular attendees at the rank out. Gus was a navigator on B-29. He flew, what's the name of the mission was? He flew 29 missions over Japan, most of which were firebombing Tokyo from Guam. Now, I don't know whether you remember, you don't remember, maybe you read about it, but we had just about beat Japan before the atomic bomb
Before the atomic bomb went in.
more Japanese were killed from the firebombs than were from the atomic bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're gonna get killed, I don't know whether it makes a difference what
Yeah.
people got all in a huff about the atomic bomb. But if you're gonna get, if they hadn't gotten them, the fire bombs would have.
Yeah.
So what difference does it make? And besides that, I was in Okinawa when they dropped it, and everybody I knew at the time was glad they did. Because we were already geared up for the invasion. We had our order, and you'd be amazed at how much stuff was in Buckner Bay, ready to go. That was only 400 miles from Japan.
You know where I was? I was sitting on the banks of the Mediterranean waiting for the ship,
You were gonna
your Navy,
you gonna
to
call
take me into the invade Japan.
Well, they would have gotten you
Huh?
there. They would have gotten
Yeah, that's what scared me. That's what worried me. But people say, you know, me, when I was in Washington, I faced a lot of this stuff about the terrible thing that we had done during World War II, dropping the atomic bomb. President Roosevelt, Truman was Truman's name on them all. Terrible thing he did. And, you know, this is true. These were sensible, well-educated people in Washington. And they wanted to compensate them and all that. And they wanted to give them all that. When I was in Congress, man, we wouldn't have given the Japs a damn penny.
Well, this proves what people said long ago, war is hell. It's not a pity-patty bridge game.
That's right. Well, let me tell you. They not only ended up, after I and a few people more like me got out of Congress, they capitulated and gave, I don't know how much, $25,000 to all those people that they took care of for 2 or 3 years. Fed them, clothed them, put them in nice buildings and nice rooms and all that stuff. Now, I'm sorry about it as I could be that we had to go to that inconvenience, but I didn't think we owed them that.
I'm sorry they abused the president in Iraq. I don't think it's a big deal.
Huh?
I think it's been overblown. Abusing the president in Iraq.
Yeah.
I don't think, it was wrong and they shouldn't have done it. But it's not as big a deal as beheading that guy that they caught him with.
Yeah, that was a terrible thing, beheading that fellow. He was innocent
Incident,
all the way.
I just dictated what I'm gonna say at the memorial on May 30th.
Now, I can't be there because I'm going to be in Washington at the big celebration.
Where is your ceremony gonna be?
At the Veterans Memorial at Country Park. And what I did here, I'll summarize it for you.
Say it.
Go ahead and read it if you want.
I want you-
Read it. Put it in the record. We ought to have it in the record.
Yeah.
If you want to, it's
I don't
up to you.
mind. I don't mind. You wanna read it?
Read it. Put it in the record.
I may clean this up a little bit, but it's basically found. Everybody want to read it?
Yeah.
Memorial Day, 19,
All right, starts off with Memorial Day.
2000.
Year 2004. We are here to honor the memory of those military veterans who have earlier passed away, to honor the veterans who are still living, and to honor the men and women present on active duty, particularly those facing great danger in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our country this time is confronted with a greater threat than it had ever before known. This was forcibly brought home to us when terrorists crashed 2 planes into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York on September 11, 2001, resulting in the loss of the lives of over 3,000 innocent people. But the threat of global terrorism, particularly the threat of Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda terrorist network, was known before from the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the 1998 bombings of 2 American embassies in East Africa, and the suicide attack on the USS Cole in the fall of 2000. The enemy we now face is elusive, powerful, evil, stealthy, deadly, disciplined, fearless, focused, and determined. the terrorists will pay any price to advance their cause until they win or die, and they do not fear death. There's no question of what we are now in World War III. Do we have the means and will for winning this war? We clearly have the means, but whether or not we have the will is subject to some debate. But win we must. The alternative is too horrible to contemplate. History often repeats itself. When it does, can we learn anything from what has earlier occurred? England was faced with a similar threat in 1940. The Germans had overrun Europe, and England was standing alone. Luckily, Winston Churchill came to the fore. Churchill addressed his nation over BBC on May 19, 1940, saying this: I speak to you for the first time as Prime Minister in a solemn hour for the life of our country, of our empire, of our allies, and above all of the cause of freedom. A tremendous battle is raging in France and Flanders. The Germans have broken through the French defenses north of the Maginot Line, and strong columns of their armored vehicles are ravaging the open country, which for the first day or two was undefended.
Without defenders, we have
Without
perpetual
defenders.
deep.
They have penetrated deeply and spread alarm and confusion in their tracks. Churchill stated that he had received the most sacred pledge from the leaders of the French Republic that whatever happened, France would fight to the end. Churchill told the country in that speech that he had formed a government of men and women of almost every point of view, Democrats and Republicans, period. Democrats and Republicans take note. Churchill said this: we have differed and quarreled in the past, but now one bond unites us all, to wage war until victory is won, and never to surrender ourselves to servitude and shame, whatever the cost and agony may be. If this is one of the most awe-striking periods in the long history of France and Britain, it is also beyond doubt the most sublime. Side by side, the British and French peoples have advanced to rescue not only Europe, but mankind from the foulest and most soul-destroying tyranny which has overdarkened and stained the pages of history. Behind them, behind us, behind the armies of Britain and France, held a group of shattered states and virgin races, the Czechs, the Poles, the Norwegians, the Danes, and Dutch, the Belgians, one all of whom a long night of barbarism will descend, unbroken even by a star of hope, unless we conquer, as conquer we must, as conquer we shall.
Despite the sacred pledge from Paris.
Despite the sacred pledge from Paris that France would fight to the end, there was doubt that this pledge would be kept. And of course it was not. Until France reneged, there was speculation that if France failed, England would also quit. On that point, Churchill vowed that England would continue the battle alone. Churchill said this: upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire. Hitler knows that he will have to break us on this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be free, and the life of the world may move forward into broad sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, people will still say, this was their finest hour. Need I say more? Now, do we at this time follow the example of France and cut and run, who withdraw from the fight and concede defeat? Or to the contrary, can we not see that we are in the early stages of World War III? That this is a real war that we cannot
Afford to lose. That our civilization
afford to lose, and that our civilization is at stake. Can we not see that this war is with terrorists worldwide who have no hesitation in attacking us, not only in foreign areas, but also within our own borders? Will we recognize in time that if the terrorists prevail, that we will sink into the abyss of a new dark age? But if we prevail, our Christian civilization as we know it will survive. Can there be any doubt as to which course of action we should take? We cannot allow partisan politics, anger at our president, a negative attitude, serious attitude, or pure fear for whatever reason, to cause us to give up the fight before complete victory is won. Recall and consider the words of President Kennedy in his 1961 inaugural address, that every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any free act, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. Let us renew that pledge.
Excellent.
Very good.
Isn't that good?
Yeah, strong.
Boy, that's Churchillian of the first order.
I hope when the liberals will
That's Churchillian of the first order.
Red kind of fast because of the
Uh-huh.
time pressure. But you think that's all right to do?
Yeah.
Oh, listen,
This is what you'll deliver at Memorial Day?
on Memorial Day. This is one that we're gonna have to memorialize this. Now, listen, when you get to this point, I've always thought that, and I've heard it many times before, that this statement is the greatest speech I've ever heard. This statement that Churchill said, let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty and so bear ourselves that the British Empire and the Commonwealth last for 1,000 years. Men will still say this was their finest hour.
Yeah. I was searching for something to say, and it occurred to me that remembering Churchill and comparing his situation with our situation today was probably a valid comparison.
Yeah, yeah.
He was faced with possible annihilation of the British Empire.
That's right.
We're faced with terrorists. We don't know where things are going.
Yeah,
Whether they're going to calm down or get worse. If they get worse, it's a hell of a danger to this country.
exactly. And people don't realize
The weapons today are greater, more deadly than they were then. Talking about biological warfare, chemical warfare. I mean, crashing planes into the Twin Towers was a hell
the
of a thing.
enemy is much more vicious. In other words, I think we've pretty much, thoughtful people have concluded that the only way to handle this is to kill them. And that, we didn't do that in World War II. I was through all of it. You all were through it too. And we never talked about that we're going to kill those damn Germans. I fought the Germans. And it wasn't part of our thing to kill the Germans, every German. And the only way to win was to kill them all. That didn't enter the American soldiers' minds.
Got off with it, didn't I?
We wanted to capture them. I captured thousands of them. Carried them in big trucks and all this stuff. I could tell you stories by the hour. But never did it cross my mind that I had to kill anybody. I don't know that I killed anybody. I threw a lot of lead around over there in Europe.
You know where it went. You know where it went, do you?
I don't know where it went. I don't know. I'm glad to be able to say that I don't know that I ever killed anybody.
You know, David Clark got up at one of our breakfasts and asked you to build it, how did it feel to shoot something to kill somebody?
Yeah.
Remember that? That was a very inappropriate question.
Yeah, oh, you did. It was. That was David Clark.
Asked ours, how did it feel to kill somebody?
Yeah.
I couldn't believe he asked that.
I wouldn't think you'd ask that. David Clark, the lawyer.
Here's the way I describe the terrorist now. I say that elusive, powerful, evil, stealthy, deadly, disciplined, fearless, focused, and determined.
But this bothers me a little
reverse.
bit. I mean, I think it's true, but it still bothers me that we hear it on TV, we hear it from all of our leading generals and everybody. We got to kill him. We got to kill this one. We got to kill. I mean, if you raised in the Christian church and you read the Bible and you know the 10 Commandments, if you have to, self-defense is self-defense. I'm not arguing against that.
We got 4 minutes left on the tape.
But really, okay.
You can have those 4 hours.
Huh?
You can have the last 4.
After the last 4, I've taken already too
You
many.
can have the last 4.
No, I'm going to yield the balance of my time to Rip Bernhardt. He hasn't exercised his prerogative of speaking, nor has our buddy over here, Lewis.
But neither one have had
Oh.
a chance. You and I were
Well,
talking.
I've been trying to invite him to do it. Yeah, you and I did. Well, y'all talk, man. Talk.
I think I asked Steve some of those questions he answered, and
Yeah.
maybe Rip has